Alright folks, welcome to part 2 of the in-depth handle making series. Our chef knife handle has cured overnight, and it is now time to start shaping this from this weird block of thing into something that's comfortable and enjoyable to hold. So the first thing we are going to do is we're going to flatten off the scales on the belt grinder. And then we are going to trim the wood to the profile of the tang, which is one nice thing about full tang knives is you have that reference point of where to stop grinding. Our scales have been flattened and they have been shaped to the profile of the handle. And now we are ready to get into shaping this to where it's comfortable. Now, one really important piece of advice I do have is feel it. Grab it as you're shaping it, grab it every which way and see if there's anything wrong with it, and if there is, then you can fix it. There is no way you're going to be able to tell how comfortable it is without feeling it in your hand and feeling it how it's going to actually be used. So the first thing I'm going to do is thin down the scales just a little bit. They're way too thick right now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to taper it from the back to the front, where the front is about 1/4 of an inch, tapering back to the thickness I want for the back of the handle. So we're going to do that. So our scales are now tapered down, and what that will do is a chef knife, you can use it, obviously several different ways. A common position is the pinch grip, just like this. And we don't want too much meat on the front of the handle to kind of get in the way. So that's kind of why I taper it. But also the way your hand is set up just feels really nice. So the next thing we're going to do, and this is just an aesthetic choice I like, is I'm going to actually, the pommel of the knife, I'm going to round it over. That gives it a really nice look in my opinion. And then after we do that, I'm going to put on my 10-inch contact wheel, and I'm going to put a little scoop right in the back here, and that'll make it extremely comfortable to hold. After that, then I'm going to start rounding things over. And like I mentioned before, when you're rounding things over, the most important thing, and when you're doing handles in general, is just feel it. And if something feels wrong, just keep working till it feels right. That's the biggest piece of advice I can offer. So you'll see I now have a subtle radius in the back of the handle, and I usually like to go about half the length of the handle. That gives it a really nice contour that fits the hand really well. So what we're going to go ahead and do now, and up to this point I've been using a 36 grit belt, and I'm going to do all my rough shaping on the 36, and then eventually I'll switch to a higher grit belt, but we're just hogging off material now. So what we're going to do now, still on the contact wheel, and I'm going to start on the back here, is I'm going to start rounding over this scooped out section. And I'm going to get it pretty close on each side, and I'll show you how close, but it's mostly just something you'll pick up over time with how it feels. So as I'm going, I'm constantly checking the back for symmetry, and we've gotten pretty close on both sides, and you'll notice the shape of the handle, it's not a perfect oval, it's actually more of a teardrop, and that's the way your hand is set up. So we do want it a little bit narrower here than up here just to fit well. So you'll notice that that is all nicely rounded over. What I'm going to do now, still on the contact wheel, and this is something that you'll just kind of get a feel for, is I'm going to start rounding over the front end of the handle. Now, kind of the key for rounding is you just take off a corner and then another corner, and you keep working these facets till it's nicely smoothed over. And again, just feel it as you go and get an understanding for what feels good would be my recommendation. So as I'm rounding this over, you'll notice that there's a flat spot here. And what I'm going to be using is using the edge of the contact wheel right here and using the edge to round this over as well. And that you can use a small wheel attachment to hit these portions, but I've had, at least for these rougher belts, good luck just taking my time so I don't have to switch over tooling every so often. Just doing it all on the same one. So let's get started. So our handle has now been rounded over on the 36. Things are pretty comfortable. I'm just grabbing it, feeling like how it's going to be used. Feeling really good so far. So now what I need to do is I'm going to switch over to a 220 J Flex belt. And we're going to be now rounding everything over even further and blending all the lines into one, as well as trying to remove as much of these 36 grit scratches as possible. Okay, so you'll notice I switched over to the flat platen, and that space between the platen and the wheels is a nice little convex that I like to use as well for shaping. So that's the general shape we have. This would be what's known as a Coke bottle shaped handle. The weight's feeling really good. Everything feels really nice in the hand. It feels good in the pinch grip. So what we're going to go ahead and do now is right now all the grind marks are going this way. So what I'm going to do is throw on a 400 grit belt, and I'm going to use my small wheel attachment for the inside here, and then the contact wheel for the outside here, and get all the lines, at least on the steel, going this way. We have all the scratch lines going in line with the blade. You don't need to worry about how pretty it is right now, because we're going to do that over again at the end. And now we're ready to start hand sanding. So the majority of the blade is at 220. And what I like to do is I like to leave it there, and then I hand sand from 400 to 600 grit. And then usually 600 is as high as I'll go. And then if I want to buff it, I can, or if I just want to do an oil finish, I can as well. So we're going to put this in the little knife vise here, and then start hand sanding. We are now going to begin hand sanding, and the goal of hand sanding is to smooth out any facets that are left and to get rid of any scratches that are in there. So I usually just use my thumbs, and that creates a nice soft backing for the sandpaper. And you can also, when you're hand sanding, if there are any imperfections, like if you're a little bit out of symmetry, you can slowly adjust it to where things are symmetrical again. So the handy thing about this knife vise is I can just keep the blade in here, and I can just turn it to hit all the spots I need to. Now, one thing to mention is brass, or whatever your pin material is going to be harder than wood. So as you do this, you will be able to feel that the pin material is not being sanded down as much as the wood. And if you notice that happening, what you can do, and what I like to do, is I like to just take a nice fine file, and then I just file everything flush, just like that. Then I wrap the piece of sandpaper around the file to give it a nice hard backing, and then I get it back up to the grit I need to. Now that's what I like to do for the flat portions, and if your whole handle didn't have any of these swooping contours, you could do that for all of them. However, if you do have any contours like this, what I do is at the end, after everything is brought up to 600 grit, I will go back to the contact wheel at 400 grit, and then I'll just hit that pin lightly, bring it down flush, and then just go back over just that spot with a 600 grit piece of sandpaper, and that seems to work pretty well. So just some pro tips here. Everything is now sanded to 600 grit. Feels really great. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is go back over to the belt grinder, and I'm going to now do the same thing I did before, just with a 400 grit belt. Clean up the profile. Then I'll hit the contoured areas because those pins are no longer smooth. And then we'll be ready to do a little bit more rounding and final work, and then this handle is ready for oil. Okay, so we are off the belt grinder. I'm just going to go over it just to smooth everything out with the 600. And when I'm going on the spine, I'm going to be really careful to go the same direction as the spine. Okay, and now one important thing is that we round over where the tang meets the handle material. And I'll just hit that right on the edge there, and I'll hit the front of the scale as well. And we're just doing this so it's comfortable to use for a long time, because the worst thing is you have this very expensive knife that has a little sharp portion on it and it sucks to use. So I think it's important to round over this section as best you can. This handle is now ready for a little buff, because I think that'll look really nice, and then we'll oil it up. Okay, so I just gave the handle a nice buff. I wouldn't consider this a mirror polish, I would just say it's a high luster, but in my opinion looks really good. It's nice and smooth. So what I do now is I use this stuff right here. This is a polymerized linseed oil, and then I'll just, this is my favorite part, seeing the wood come to life. Put a nice thick coat on, and then I'll just let it sit like this, and I'll keep reapplying coats, usually for a couple days, and that just soaks right into the wood and creates a nice surface finish. Now I used to use a product called True Oil, but that has some pretty nasty ingredients in it, so this stuff is a little more hand and user friendly, as well as a little more environmentally friendly, and it's completely food safe. So nice thick coat on there, and then this will just hang out with the rest of these blades that are getting oiled for the next couple days till all the sheaths and stuff are done, and they'll be ready to go to their customer. It's turned out really well. Alright, there we go folks. I'm super stoked on how that blade turned out. Handle turned out awesome. I hope that was helpful for at least the one person that asked for this video. That's kind of the process I go through for my handles. The best advice I have is just go out to your shop and just do it and see what feels right, see what doesn't, and then build your own process based on that. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.